Alexander Cherkov. The House at the Crossroads. A fantasy tale set upon the 8.5 steps of the pyramid of Antrrealities. Step 1. The wanderer jolted awake from the sound of his own scream and an unbearable, searing pain in his lungs that pierced his entire body. He felt his legs tightly wedged in some sort of narrow funnel, while his body was flooded with new, unfamiliar sensations. He was struck by his own inability to use his hands to pull himself out of the trap. Looking up, he discerned a face that, despite everything, seemed already familiar. As the features grew clearer, the wanderer recognized a young man who was smiling, his entire demeanor radiating genuine joy. "Come on, give me your hand. I'll help you up," the young man said in a jubilant voice. The wanderer could not understand the reason for such joy. His body was suffering, racked by exhaustion and pain. He saw no cause for celebration. However, a moment after he felt the touch of his Savior's hand, he sensed an unknown freedom within his body and an indescribable, bewildering delight. The wanderer cried out again, though this time it was from a strange ecstasy. "There now. Easy. You can relax. It's all over. You are in the pyramid," the young man said, still smiling. "Who are you?" the wanderer asked warily. "I am your guide," the young man replied, patting the wanderer on the back while maintaining that misplaced smile. "What guide? A guide to where?" the wanderer asked in confusion. "You're suffering from shock-induced amnesia right now. Everyone goes through it. You'll remember soon enough," the guide replied, not looking at the wanderer, but peering somewhere upward. "Not all at once, of course. Your memory will return as the need arises. Don't worry. You will remember everything you need to know in the moment," the guide said, looking back at the wanderer with a friendly smile. The guide's voice made the wanderer feel calmer, and indeed, he began to recall something. At first, it was only yesterday. Yes, he had met the guide precisely yesterday. He had been recommended as the best guide through the pyramid. And despite the lad's overly young and frivolous appearance, the wanderer agreed. Since there wasn't much choice, he understood that he wouldn't get through this quest on his own. The wanderer couldn't remember why he needed this adventure. Knowing himself, he realized he wouldn't have climbed in here just for the adrenaline. Apparently, there was a compelling reason, but he couldn't remember it, no matter how hard he strained. However, he remembered yesterday in detail. It was already getting dark when the guide led the wanderer to a completely ordinary, even quite mediocre-looking, low house and said, "Here it is, the house at the crossroads. The journey through the pyramid begins from it." Notes of reverence were heard in the guide's voice. Yet such piety seemed completely inappropriate to the wanderer. They entered. From the inside, the house looked even more wretched. A single windowless room with a single door through which they had entered. The room's furnishing was more than ascetic. There was no thing there, meaning it was absolutely empty. "And where is the door leading to the pyramid?" asked the wanderer, frowning. "Later, all later," answered the guide, smiling mysteriously and winking an eye like a conspirator. All this did not instill confidence in the wanderer, and he looked disappointed and confused. "Now we'll have a snack and go to sleep. And at dawn on the road. It won't be easy," said the guide, handing the wanderer a bottle with a suspiciously cloudy liquid. The wanderer's condition did not allow him to resist, and taking the bottle from the guide's hand without a murmur, he began to gulp down the liquid. Surprisingly, the drink turned out to be very pleasant to the taste and quickly restored his strength. "And now sleep," said the guide in a tone that brooked no objections. "Where? On what?" the wanderer remarked in bewilderment, but the guide was no longer listening to him. He lay down on the floor, and almost instantly his breathing became even, slow, and deep. The wanderer had no choice but to do the same. Surprisingly, lying on the floor turned out to be unexpectedly comfortable. The last thing that remained in the wanderer's memory from yesterday was that, curled up in a ball like long ago in childhood, he felt, for the first time in many years of his life, completely calm and serene. He also remembered the beginning of a dream, as if the walls of the house enveloped him from all sides, affectionately touching his body. And he felt as he did in childhood when his mother hugged him. And he woke up already in the pyramid. When, distracted from the memories of yesterday, the wanderer looked at the guide again. He saw some object in his hands. The guide was intently studying the graphs and signs glowing on this object. It looked strange. "What is that?" the wanderer inquired. "It's a map of the pyramid," answered the guide, not taking his eyes off the screen. Then he added, "A navigator. Besides the fact that the navigator informs about the current state of the situation on the steps of the pyramid and shows the way, it also registers and analyzes your readiness. As you have probably already understood, we need to go up and pass all the steps. This is necessary, firstly, because you must remember why you came here. This will certainly happen on one of the steps. And secondly, to find a solution to the problem that necessitated your participation in this quest. This happens only at the end of the journey. But I must warn you, not for everyone. There, everything will depend only on you," said the guide and, after a pause, continued. "On the way, you will have to answer the questions of all the Antrrealities inhabiting the steps of the pyramid. After the conversation with the last Antrreality, you will receive a decision on the fate of your appeal." The guide's voice sounded without its former enthusiasm, and he himself no longer seems so young and frivolous. "And if I can't give a satisfactory answer to one of them?" asked the wanderer with feigned indifference. "Nothing terrible will happen. You will simply find yourself on the first step again and can start all over," answered the guide and continued. "It's up to you. In the end, if you get tired of moving through the pyramid, just say the word and I will return you to the house at the crossroads. And then do what you want." "And what are these Antrrealities?" asked the wanderer with greater calmness now. "Have patience. Everything in its time." The guide's voice became stricter. "Your problem brought you here, which you need to resolve." "But I don't remember anything," the wanderer said thoughtfully. His face expressed concern. "That doesn't matter for me, or for you, or for the Antrrealities. They see right through you anyway." "But who are they, these Antrrealities?" There was persistence in the wanderer's voice. "And what is this, the pyramid? And where did it come from? Calm down and let's take it in order." It was clear that the guide was ready to proceed with explanations. "The pyramid arose when you fell asleep in the house at the crossroads, as a response to an insurmountable desire to resolve your problem. It doesn't concern me, but when you remember why you wanted to enter here, you can tell me. Or not, if you don't want to. Nothing here depends on me. Only on how the Antrrealities relate to you." "Who the hell are they?" "Don't utter that name," the guide remarked sharply. Then he continued. "They are related to him in some way, but they themselves are not malicious. They even love visitors. Antrrealities are entities spawned by humans, out of necessity and as a result of their good intentions. The word Antrreality is a diminutive form of the concept anthropogenic reality, a reality that is created by people and exists at their expense as long as they people exist. If humanity disappears, then the Antrrealities will disappear too. Therefore, they are very dependent on people, but they want people to depend on them." For some time, the guide silently peered into the navigator's screen. The navigator shows that your chance of passing this quest far exceeds the average level of chances of the pyramid's visitors. For what reason is that? Am I so smart and handsome? Don't flatter yourself. You are quite ordinary, but your desire to resolve your problem really stands out among others. And don't worry, you will definitely remember everything when the time comes for it. "Okay, we'll see," answered the wanderer. This conversation calmed him down a little again. But I don't understand what pyramid you're talking about. For now, I see that we are in the depths of some funnel. Well, yes. The pyramid of Antrrealities stands on its apex. It is an inverted pyramid. What an ordinary pyramid has as a base. This one keeps growing upwards and widening due to the appearance of new Antrrealities. Like a bush grows from its root. When a person doesn't know which path to choose, he enters the house at the crossroads. And the pyramid of Antrrealities, like a beam of light, grows out of this house. For a time, the guide fell silent. After a pause, he continued. At the base, the beam is bright and strong. Then the light weakens, but the eyes adapt to distinguishing by that time. Everyone passes the lower steps without problems. Everything there is clear and distinguishable enough. But on the very top ones, the power of the light emitted from the house at the crossroads is already a bit lacking. There, a more developed capacity for distinction is required, especially since the Antrrealities inhabiting those parts are more cunning and hypocritical. They can easily fool those wanderers who haven't managed to develop in themselves the capacity to distinguish these entities. But you'll figure this out. It's easier for them to twist around their finger those who don't know what they want. The navigator says you are not like that. And don't be afraid of them. They are not dangerous to your life. They don't kill because they need people more than people need them. And one more thing. A person doesn't need all the Antrrealities to achieve his goal. The Antrrealities, however, are interested in every person. Right now, you and I are on the first step. Here dwells the oldest entity, occupying the entire step, the Antrreality named Code. They say it isn't quite an Antrreality, since it appeared not as a result of human activity, but simultaneously with them. Allegedly, it is half realized by a higher power and half by man. But I don't know whether to believe this or not. The guide fell silent, then added, "Well, you'll figure it out for yourself." Something blinked on the navigator's screen. Now the navigator says that Code is about to manifest, since you are already ready to meet him, said the guide. The wanderer noticed that at this moment the space around him was filling with red, not even light, but a transparent color. Suddenly, he felt completely confident. Anxiety dissolved. In the upper part of the space surrounding the wanderer, a shimmering cloud suddenly appeared, consisting of a myriad of red dots. It was motionless, but shimmered dynamically within itself. The wanderer heard a voice sounding as if inside his head, in the area above the forehead, in the place where newborns have a fontanelle. "Have we met before?" The question sounded impartial. The wanderer thought that Code's question was simply a courtesy shown at a first introduction. He replied with a reciprocal courtesy. "Well, such an outstanding event I would have remembered. It seems not. What do you see before you?" The wanderer suddenly realized that the previous question was, after all, Code's first question. He became confused. "What do I see before me?" asked the wanderer back, trying to gain time to think over the answer. "Are you ready to go further?" The wanderer was dumbfounded. After all, he hadn't yet answered the second question and, without thinking, blurted out, "Yes." The cloud dissolved, and the red color around the wanderer suddenly turned orange. Suddenly he saw the guide next to him, who had disappeared somewhere before that. In fright, the wanderer asked, "Did I ruin everything?" "You are now on the second step." The guide's voice expressed surprise. "You are the first in my practice who slipped through the first step with such ease." "I don't understand." The wanderer also looked confused and surprised. "Okay, let's discuss what awaits you on the second step," said the guide and took out the navigator again. "Step," said the guide and took out the navigator again. Step 2. The step they found themselves on constituted a room somewhat larger than the previous one. Its walls were just as slanted as before, widening toward the ceiling, and the whole resembled an inverted trapezoid. The walls of the space were covered with numerous lines, signs, and figures. Some images looked unexpectedly masterful, captivating the wanderer's gaze. Scattered on the floor here and there lay figurines carved from wood, bone, or stone. Most of them were quite small, only a few centimeters in size. But there were also fairly large specimens. In the opposite end of the hall, the wanderer saw either a child or a gnome, clearly female, diligently and enthusiastically hewing a figure out of stone, of a size immense for her stature. The wanderer could not make out her face. Suddenly, he noticed another little one crossing the space of the step with a marching stride. It was funny to observe how, maintaining deep concentration and seriousness, she stepped, lifting the toe of her straight leg high up and accompanying this with a swing of the straight arm. On the opposite side, she marched like a soldier on a parade ground, which seemed quite amusing. Yet another little one suddenly manifested to the side of the wanderer. She was mooing something like a deaf-mute, addressing it was unclear whom. "What is happening here?" The wanderer turned to the guide, who was smiling, observing his confusion. "I already told you. We are on the second step of the pyramid, where 3 Antrrealities dwell. These entities are in a direct kinship connection with code. That entity, which is mooing, is called voice. She knows no words, but it is not difficult to communicate with her. The sounds she makes are quite distinguishable and understandable, just as a mother understands the sounds an infant makes." "And who is this marching little one?" The wanderer was asking the guide questions, not understanding what was happening here. "They are not little ones. Their age exceeds tens of thousands of years. The one you asked about is called Ritual, an amazing entity watching over the order on this step. Without her, everything here would fall apart." "And what kind of entity is sculpting in that far corner?" The wanderer noted to himself that he was getting used to not being surprised. "Her name is Protoart. She also likes to sing and dance, and also to play on a pipe and tambourine made by herself." The wanderer was no longer surprised by anything. Suddenly he heard the mooing of voice, who was tugging at his pant leg. Looking down, the wanderer guessed that voice was addressing him. "Mm. Her eyes were wide open, and her eyelids twitched inquiringly. The wanderer looked at the guide inquiringly. The guide translated. "She is asking whom you came to see." "I didn't come to see anyone. Just passing by." The wanderer couldn't shake the thought that he was speaking with a child. Voice continued the interrogation. "She is asking where you are going," translated the guide. "Oh," sighed the wanderer. "I go there, not knowing where." Voice burst into laughter. Suddenly, becoming serious, she droned. "Ooh." "She asks if you are afraid." "No, I'm not afraid. Except that I don't know what will happen." Voice chuckled, waved her hand, and walked away. "Is that all?" the wanderer asked the guide with surprise. He had expected something more difficult for himself. "Two more Antrrealities await you here," answered the guide. At that moment, Ritual approached the wanderer with a crisp, measured step. Looking the wanderer straight in the eyes and standing at attention, Ritual asked in a loud voice, as staccato as her step, "Do you want to march with me?" The wanderer was confused. He didn't want to offend Ritual, but he also didn't want to join this game. "I would join, but I'm in a hurry today. Maybe another time." The wanderer tried to answer a question with a question. "Do you think that Ritual is a game?" Ritual seemed to read the wanderer's thoughts. "No, I don't think so." The wanderer's voice sounded uncertain. Ritual flashed her eyes. "Have you at least done something before with constancy and repeatability of rhythm?" Yes. I brush my teeth every day before sleep." "Well, at least I try. Because it's hard for me to fall asleep without it." The wanderer remembered joyfully. Ritual commanded herself about face, turned 180 degrees, and marched away. The wanderer sighed with relief. "Protoart awaits us," said the guide to the wanderer. Unhurriedly, they crossed the space of the step. Protoart turned her head toward the wanderer. "Do you like to draw?" asked Proto-Art, smiling friendly. "I don't know how. It is not given to me," answered the wanderer. "Nonsense. Everyone knows how. And what about singing or dancing?" The Antrrealia continued her interrogation. "Somehow didn't get into that either," answered the wanderer, shrugging his shoulders apologetically. "Well, can you do at least something?" Proto-Art's voice expressed growing dissatisfaction. "I wrote poems in my youth." The Antrrealia sighed with relief and returned to her work. The color of the space turned yellow, and the wanderer guessed that he had passed the second step after all. Step 3. The area of the third step exceeded the area of the previous one by almost double. Its space was flooded with a bright yellow color, as if by the sun. The feeling of confidence returned to the wanderer. He saw that the space of this step was divided into 5 unequal parts, partitioned by light curtains that prevented one from making out what was happening in each cell. It seemed that the relations of the Antrrealities among themselves differed from what was seen on the previous step, and not towards greater friendliness, judging by the density of the light canvas between them. It seemed that each of them kept secrets from the others. In any case, the isolation of each entity was palpable. "We are on the third step." The guide's voice sounded even, almost indifferent. The wanderer noticed that the guide's appearance had also changed noticeably. He looked older, more serious, and colder. That joyful curiosity, which the wanderer had noticed yesterday, had disappeared in him. Was it yesterday? Flashed through his mind. He asked, "And how much time have we already been in the pyramid?" The guide chuckled coldly. "You none, but I a long time." "Explain," demanded the wanderer. "Time has stopped for you here. Or rather, your metabolism has stopped." "It is difficult for me to explain. I myself don't understand what happens here, but my metabolism accelerates. In short, however long this quest continues, even on the last step you will remain physically unchanged. You won't even want to eat or drink. For you, movement through the pyramid is timeless. I am a different matter. Usually, on the last step, I become a very old man. You are dedicating your whole life to me." The wanderer's eyes rounded. "Not exactly. In the pyramid, yes. But when I return to the house at the crossroads, I will be young again." "Is it like reincarnation?" "No. If you add up all the time I have spent in the pyramid, then I am already many thousands of years old. However, when I return back, my earthly age is restored, although memory multiplies. But I am used to it." It was clear that the guide did not intend to maintain this topic any longer, and indeed he moved on to the description of the third step. Here dwell 5 Antrrealities, entities much more advanced along the vector of evolution. They look young, but they too are many thousands of years old. The guide fell silent, then continued. "Before we go into the first of them, I will introduce you to it, very briefly, and you yourself know a lot about them. The first entity is named Count. Its appearance was conditioned by the necessity for early humans to cope with difficulties in planning their immediate future. As they say, life forced it. Count looks indifferent. But this is a deception. It has to participate in distribution, in which it is difficult to observe absolute justice. It tries to preserve indifference, at least outwardly." The wanderer, accompanied by the guide, approached the first light curtain. The light suddenly vanished, and a strange picture opened to the wanderer's gaze. Before him appeared a figure covered with a thick layer of digits. It was unclear what these signs were created from, but they looked mobile, as if they were alive. The Antrrealia Count itself stood motionless in the middle of the space of its cell. Scattered on the floor were mathematical signs, pluses, minuses, and even sometimes signs of equality, multiplication, and division. The signs also seemed alive. They moved and looked repulsive. The wanderer involuntarily took a step back. "How many hairs are on your head?" asked Count. The wanderer began to think feverishly. Why does it ask? After all, it doesn't matter to it. Aloud he answered. Even though they are my hairs, it doesn't interest me. I think that not everything is necessary to count. The Antrreality's eyes seemed unconcerned. How much time did it take you to get here? Count's second question stumped the wanderer. After the guide's explanation about the specifics of the passage of time in the pyramid, he understood that this could be a trap. I don't know. Perhaps time here is incalculable. Not everything is possible to count. Count's eyes remained impenetrable. How to study that which is impossible to count? The wanderer thought that he had fallen into a trap after all. Say that everything that is impossible to count is insignificant, thought the wanderer. Count did not rush him and continued to remain unconcerned. The world is incalculable, fundamentally unattainable, irrational. Something resembling a smile flashed in Count's eyes. The light curtain flared up again and hid Count in its cell. The wanderer felt a slight dizziness. Together with the guide, they moved along the step. Now they stood opposite a curtain somewhat different from the previous one. Here dwells an entity called language, a complex little thing. It was formed from voice by way of substituting code for symbol. This facilitated communication between people, but also gave them the opportunity to lie and be hypocritical, to mask a false essence with beautiful words. This happened gradually, but inevitably. The wanderer tensed up. At that moment the light curtain disappeared. What he saw before him plunged him into shock. Before him appeared a stunningly beautiful young woman. Everything about her, from the hair on her head to the nails on the toes of her slender feet, represented perfection itself. Her body was enveloped in golden light. Aside from this light, there was nothing on her. Her beauty shocked and paralyzed the wanderer. She was staggeringly charming. Words were superfluous. The Antrreality language was so beautiful that it seemed she could not be untrue. Have you met anyone more beautiful than me? Asked the Antrreality, running her tongue over her lips, returning a moist shine to them. This question sounded to the wanderer like a song of love. He wanted to answer, but merely mooed something unintelligible. Do you like me? The wanderer felt that language was mesmerizing him. I have no words. The wanderer felt that his mouth had gone dry, and his own tongue was going numb in impotence. Do you want to stay with me? For a second, the wanderer was struck dumb. Instead of an answer, he wanted to enter the Antrreality's cell. The temptation to stay with her seemed insurmountable. From behind, as if through a cotton fog, he discerned the guide's whisper. Be careful. It cost the wanderer an incredible effort to vocalize an answer. No, no. The light curtain, flaring up again, hid the beautiful and almost irresistible Antrreality from his eyes. The wanderer turned sharply to the guide. What is with you? Couldn't you have warned me? Well, why? After all, I said that she is dangerous and knows how to hide evil intentions behind a beautiful external form. Language is not always, but can be a weapon of deadly seduction. Remember the serpent. After a small pause, the guide continued. The guide took a few steps in the direction of the next curtain, and the wanderer followed him. Behind this curtain dwells the Antrreality named protohistory. She is not as dangerous to man as language, but still, one should be on guard with her. She also loves to mask lies as truth. Okay, forewarned is forearmed. A phrase as banal as it is true, thought the wanderer. At that moment the stream of light went out, and a quite respectable picture opened before him. A rather young, strictly dressed woman with hair gathered in a bun stood in the middle of her cell and seemed to be writing something in the air with her finger. The wanderer turned to the guide and asked, What is she writing? What can she be writing? On this step, there is no writing system yet, the guide answered quietly. What story can you tell about yourself? Protohistory asked the wanderer strictly, like a schoolteacher. Actually, I have nothing special to tell, answered the wanderer, huddling up slightly. He didn't really like this Antrreality. Have you not lived since you have no story. Notes of mockery were heard in Protohistory's voice. Born, studied, married, worked, lost everything. Then came here. But you wrote poems. What is with you? Protohistory turned away from the wanderer. She waited for his answer. The silence dragged on. It was necessary to say something. My story is simple. I am one of millions just like me who missed the chance to create their own story. That can be told aloud. Protohistory turned her face to the wanderer again. The mockery vanished from her eyes. Everyone has a second chance to write their story. Go. Do not miss it too. The light curtain appeared again. The wanderer continued to stand as if frozen. The guide called him quietly. Can you move? The next Antrreality is already waiting for us. The wanderer started. Yes, I can go. You almost failed the mission. They don't like losers here, said the guide, frowning. Losers are not liked anywhere, answered the wanderer. They don't even like themselves. That is exactly their problem. The guide shrugged his shoulders and spread his hands. Both fell silent. At this time, the next light curtain became paler and more transparent. The Antrreality tradition is already waiting for you. Hurry up. The guide's voice was warm and friendly again. The wanderer stepped forward. He saw before him the figure of a woman of quite advanced age. The soft maternal features of her face expressed hospitality and soft joy. From behind he heard the guide's whisper, "Don't relax. Be on guard." Tradition invited him to enter her cell with a gesture. However, the wanderer, obeying intuition, remained in place. The Antrreality did not insist. The wanderer thought to himself that nothing good shone for him here either. He remembered that he did not like traditions, considering them an unnecessary burden, and believed that there were too many of them. The flow of his thoughts was interrupted by the voice of tradition. Do you understand why you have no personal story that is not shameful to tell? The wanderer thought that indeed his life had become like a tumbleweed plant, deprived of roots. I think so. I didn't want to live like everyone else, believing that I was unique. You think that living like everyone else hinders your uniqueness? Asked tradition with a soft smile. This question caught the wanderer off guard. He really did think so. He suddenly realized the absurdity of this far-fetched dilemma. There was a trap of losing self-identification. In reality, living with everyone and living like everyone does not contradict creating one's own unique story in any way. Or does it? Thoughts in his head rushed like mad. Tradition's insinuating voice confused his thoughts. I don't know, squeezed out the wanderer, almost in a whisper. Tradition's face expressed jubilation. Do you want to stay with me to learn how to live correctly? Oh no, this lesson was enough. Thank you. The guide's voice gained firmness. Tradition's face expressed some disappointment, but still remained benevolent. The light curtain slowly gained its density. The wanderer looked inquiringly at the guide. Everything is in order. Let's go further, said the guide and stopped near the last curtain of light on this step. Here dwells religion. This entity is the most mysterious of all. Her secrets are unknown to anyone. It remains only to believe her, or not to believe. She proves nothing to anyone, offering a choice. In this sense, she is the most liberal. The wanderer felt that another paradox was rolling over him. His head was spinning. He was no longer sure of anything. You say that she does not suppress freedom of choice, but that is not so, said the wanderer, trying to understand. It is not religion that suppresses. It is her adherents who thus express their devotion and loyalty to her. Religion is not a duty. It is a need. After all, one way or another, you eventually choose what to believe in that which is not given to know. After all, atheism, in this sense, is also a religion, and its adherents also suppress. The wanderer was no longer so sure of himself. The light curtain slowly dissolved. In the center of the space that opened to the gaze, he saw the silhouette of a woman with a majestic bearing. She looked silently at the wanderer for some time. Then she asked, Do you know what you are looking for? I haven't remembered yet, but I know that what I am looking for is necessary to me, answered the wanderer. It is good that you believe in the meaning of your path, even if not realizing it. It is good, repeated the Antrrealia. It seemed she was in no hurry to ask questions. Religion turned her back to the wanderer and began to peer upwards. The wanderer followed the invitation of her gaze. Above, he saw that in the space where religion dwelt, there was no ceiling. His gaze drowned in infinity. What do you see there? Asked the Antrrealia very quietly. The wanderer was silent, and religion did not rush him. Finally, he uttered, "Eternity." His voice was almost inaudible. The wanderer was seized by a trembling awe he hadn't experienced for a long time. As if it were not he peering into eternity, but eternity peering into him, a feeling he had heard about from others, or perhaps had read somewhere. Who do you feel yourself to be? Asked the Antrrealia, not turning around and continuing to peer upwards. The wanderer thought that he felt like a quantum before the face of the universe, insignificantly small. Religion suddenly turned to the wanderer. A quantum is not a non-entity. It is a fundamental particle of her. Religion turned away from the wanderer again. The light curtain slowly returned. The wanderer felt that the color of the surrounding space began to turn slightly green. He turned to the guide and suddenly saw before him not a young, but a fully mature man, almost the same age as him. His face was covered by a short beard. The wanderer's eyes expressed amazement. The guide chuckled joyously. "Have you forgotten about the relativity of time?" he asked, clearly not expecting an answer. The wanderer remained. He asked, clearly not expecting an answer. The wanderer remained. Step 4. The step on which they found themselves was organized differently than the previous one. Glass semi-transparent spheres were scattered across its area. In each of them, one could make out something located in the center. Here, on the 4th step, meetings with 7 Antrrealities await you. They differ from those you met before, if only because they are already well described in history, and you know a lot about them. But even here, be ready for surprises. That which we accept as knowledge is often an illusion. The guide led the wanderer to one of the spheres. Actually, there is no strict order of succession here, but the navigator suggests the entity named literature as the first Antrrealia of this step for you. She arose simultaneously with writing and became the basis of many changes in people's lives. Words gained the possibility of existence independent of man. They began to gain power over people. The written word gained control over humanity. Now it became unclear who serves whom. The word serves man or man serves the word. There were even such people who sincerely believed. In the beginning was the word. Well, you know all this yourself. The guide finished his monologue. Since the sphere had become completely transparent, inside the sphere, the wanderer discerned a multitude of handwritten scrolls, tablets, and even books. On these artifacts, the wanderer discerned signs arranged in rows and columns, forming texts inaccessible to his understanding. A voice resounded from inside the sphere, although it was unclear who was speaking. "I know you wrote poems. Are you a poet?" The voice sounded insinuating and, with its sincere intonation, invited agreement. But the wanderer had long ago learned to distinguish rhyming from poems, and poetry from versification. "No, I was never a poet," answered the wanderer, frowning. Literature's voice continued. Fellini is right. There are many poems. Poets are lacking. For some time, literature fell silent. Then she continued, "But did you want to feel like a poet?" In this question, the wanderer sensed some trick of literature, but could not understand what exactly. "I didn't have enough talent," answered the wanderer, but an intonation of uncertainty flickered in his voice. "Nonsense. Literature pronounced by syllables. You were simply afraid to be yourself before yourself." The wanderer could not digest this verbal construction. "I don't understand what you are about," answered the wanderer, looking under his feet. You understand everything. Literature was clearly losing interest in the wanderer. So, for all your experience of versification, not a single poem of yours has remained in your memory. The wanderer felt that literature was driving at something. He didn't quite understand her. Actually, I remember some of my poems and sometimes replay them in my memory. In reality, you are a poet, for poets write poems for themselves. The Antrrealia remarked and continued. Have you tried to publish them? To read them to at least someone? Yes. To my wife. And my daughter read them. And did they like your poems? Asked literature and immediately added. However, it is not important. The glass surface of the sphere became semi-transparent again. The wanderer turned to the guide. Did she let me pass? What kind of question is that? After all, you are still here, answered the guide with irony in his voice. Let's go to the next sphere. Near the neighboring sphere, the guide stopped. Here dwells a strange entity. This Antrrealia is called ethics. Sometimes she is called morality, sometimes morals, sometimes conscience. But in reality, these are all just her different faces. She is a child of code, embodied by people to distinguish good and evil in the world. As if they are not the same thing. I don't understand you, said the wanderer, expressing disagreement with a gesture. What do you mean to say by that? Man can distinguish good and evil only within himself, and even then with difficulty, since he prefers not to wake his conscience. It is easier to get along with it when it sleeps. Do you mean to say that there is no struggle between good and evil in the world? Asked the wanderer, trying to put all his sarcasm into the question. Of course. After all, it is obvious, answered the guide condescendingly and continued. In the world, good competes with good, truth with truth, faith with faith, conviction with conviction, and evil fights with evil, and hatred with hatred. In other words, everyone fights with themselves. Sometimes this competition takes on a deadly character. It is like humanity fighting with itself, approaching self-destructs. The guide sighed deeply, then added, but inside a person, this struggle truly takes the form of a struggle between good and evil. Like in Dostoevsky, here the devil struggles with God, and the battlefield is the human heart, and even then, only because he cannot admit the presence of evil intentions in God. The guide finished his speech when the glass surface of the sphere cleared. Inside the sphere, the wanderer saw nothing. It seemed empty. He looked back at the guide. Ethics is transparent as a tear, and her voice is quiet and distinguishable with difficulty. Therefore, concentrate your attention. The wanderer turned his face to the sphere again and suddenly heard a truly barely perceptible voice, almost a whisper. Why don't you want to remember why you came here? I cannot. I have amnesia, said the wanderer. He knew he was telling the truth, but felt that it sounded like an attempt to justify himself. It is simply more convenient for you not to know what you are doing. The voice of ethics sounded without reproach and seemed monotonous, as if she had to repeat this phrase 1,000 times in a row. Ethics continued her questioning. Do you suppose that you will be able to reach the goal without knowing of it? The question looked rhetorical, but created tension in the wanderer's stomach. He felt a bodily spasm from the absurdity of his situation. Okay, don't answer. Everything is clear as it is. Don't strain yourself. Not all my questions have ready answers. Can you promise me something? Yes, of course, answered the wanderer without thinking. When you remember why you came here, remember me. The surface of the sphere quickly lost its absolute transparency. The wanderer strode with relief after the guide to the next sphere. This sphere was especially to bid. Will you tell me something about the next entity? Asked the wanderer of the silent guide. There isn't much to tell here. Philosophy dwells here, in short. If at length you still won't understand anything anyway, I think she doesn't understand herself. As for me, it's a total madhouse here. This Antrrealia has subpersonalities beyond counting. a total splitting of consciousness, and each of her eyes is sure of its rectitude. The guide fell silent. The pause dragged on. Probably need to knock. Apparently, arguments inside the sphere are in full swing. Quietly, very quietly, the guide knocked with a fingernail on the glass surface of the sphere, and immediately its surface became transparent. Contrary to the wanderer's expectation, the sphere inside, just as the last time, looked empty. In bewilderment, he looked at the guide. Philosophy is a tangled ball of thoughts. Have you ever seen thoughts? Asked the guide with a chuckle. The wanderer nevertheless continued to peer through the glass of the sphere into the interior. Suddenly he heard a voice sounding right in his ears, as if he were wearing headphones. What do you think about the pyramid? The very first question stumped the wanderer. He hadn't thought about it. Well, it is a path that leads. He realized he had nothing to add. The voice of philosophy giggled contentedly. Okay, I was joking. I myself don't really know for sure yet. My head is already splitting from hypotheses. But have you at least thought about it? Well, you couldn't not have thought about it, right? Asked philosophy and laughed again with a small, nasty laugh. The wanderer did not expect that philosophy could be so risible and talkative. He expected deeper questions from her. Thought didn't think. What is the difference? This answer caused an explosion of Homeric laughter from philosophy. She could not calm down for several minutes. The wanderer looked puzzled. After the laughter ceased, philosophy's voice suddenly changed. Tell me, is infinity plus one greater than infinity? She spoke in a thoughtful voice. From this useless question, the wanderer remembered the guide's warning about the psyche of this Antrreality. He thought that the answer should be just as senseless as the question. I will risk assuming that both infinity and infinity plus one are both greater than zero. That is a bold hypothesis. I will think it over, pronounced philosophy. And the surface of the sphere returned to a semi-transparent state. The wanderer turned to the guide. What was that? Is this entity really called philosophy? Here, what matters is not what you understood about philosophy, but what she understood about you. Together they moved to the next sphere. Here dwells a highly self-enclosed entity, the Antrreality esoterics. The wanderer thought that it would be difficult for him with this entity, not because he considered esoterics as pseudoscience, and not because there are many swindlers and deceivers among its followers. He knew that there were plenty of cunning people and hypocrites in other spheres of life too. On the contrary, he considered esoteric practices to be very effective and potent areas of knowledge. However, something held him back from approaching the mystical world. He felt the might of esoterics, but diligently avoided any occasions to approach it too closely, sensing a real danger in it for himself. Approaching the sphere where esoterics resided, the wanderer stopped a little way off. Esoterics doesn't like outsiders too much, said the guide. Placing his hand on the surface of the sphere, the glass slowly became more and more transparent. The wanderer made out a multitude of different devices and mysterious thick books in the sphere. There were some flasks, maps, mirrors, crystal balls, skulls, and huge tomes. And again, he did not see a tangible presence of the Antrreality. Suddenly, a loud shout made him startle in surprise. Why did you come here? The wanderer had already somehow gotten used to the fact that Antrrealities are interested in the reason for his arrival in the pyramid. But he had not yet encountered such a categorical and clearly unfriendly form of the question. I came here in search of my goal. As I understand, one of the Antrrealities can awaken my memory. Perhaps it is you. The wanderer tried to speak while maintaining composure. He did not want to show his fears. Do you suppose that you will find the answer with me in secret knowledge? Sounded the second question of esoterics. Only if you yourself want to reveal it to me, answered the wanderer, noting to himself that he did not need to simulate respect for this Antrreality. The wanderer physically felt his feeling of reverence for her, which mixed with insurmountable trembling. Esoterics seemed satisfied. The next question sounded in a more peaceable tone. Do you know why you fear me? The glass of the sphere quickly returned to a state of semi-transparency. The wanderer understood that he had to give the answer to this question to himself. And you are good. I thought the navigator was exaggerating your abilities, said the guide, shrugging his shoulders. And continued. Actually, a quest for 64 Antrrealities, which fell to your lot, is a rarity. Usually, other wanderers are offered an easier quest, where there are fewer Antrrealities and their questions. And what is the minimum number of Antrrealities for a wanderer in the pyramid? He asked without particular curiosity, just to maintain the conversation. I don't know what other guides have encountered, but in my practice, fewer than 7 Antrrealities have not been met. However, not everyone could overcome the questions of even these 7, and more than mine. Have you had wanderers who went through more complex quests than mine? Oh ho! And how? There were quests for many hundreds of Antrrealities and thousands of their questions. But very, very rarely. These were isolated cases. This answer of the guide excited the wanderer's curiosity. And why do I have exactly this number? The wanderer persisted. I don't know for sure. But I think that the pyramid offers each wanderer as many trials as he is capable of overcoming. But far from all examinees are capable of realizing their potential to pass the quest. To be honest, I still don't understand why. Maybe because it is necessary to strain oneself for this, and they don't really want to. In any case, people save their strength too often. As if saved strength can be taken with them to the other world, the guide shrugged his shoulders. The wanderer noticed that they had come right up to the next semi-transparent glass sphere. Here dwells science, a highly ambitious and arrogant entity. Her adherents consider her the smartest Antrreality. They are proud of her achievements, not wishing to see what dangers she spawns. The wanderer did not fear science, relying on her rationality. He considered himself rational enough as well. At this moment, the glass limiting the sphere became completely transparent. Inside, the wanderer saw a huge number of boards covered with countless mathematical formulas. He remembered that which is impossible to calculate may not exist at all. A voice, ringing out in his brain from the left side, sounded balanced and confident. Have you already remembered your goal? Not yet, but I hope that you can help me, answered the wanderer, feeling trust in the Antrreality for the first time. In what way can I help you? Can you propose a method? The wanderer began to understand that science was in no hurry to take responsibility for his fate upon herself. She no longer seemed so friendly, but demonstrated an inclination toward pragmatic efficiency. But allow me, I am not a scientist. How can I propose methods? The wanderer was taken aback. Sorry, I can answer only questions that are clearly and logically formulated. And what did you expect from me? The glass quickly became semi-transparent again. The wanderer understood that science's last question was purely rhetorical. He looked inquiringly at the guide. We can go further. Don't be upset. Science rarely justifies the expectations of wanderers. Besides, her help is practically always accompanied by such side effects that they can nullify all the benefit of her help. But science tries not to think about this, preferring to preserve efficiency. She tries to shift the responsibility for the side effects to other Antrrealities, believing that she shouldn't slow down because of them. Meanwhile, the wanderer and the guide approached the next sphere. And right here is the Antrreality named economics. She considers herself the sister of science, but in reality, this is not so. Why do you say that? Asked the wanderer, puzzled. You know yourself that the actual state of the economy is determined more by the emotional state of society than by mathematical calculations, that is, by non-rational motives. What kind of science is that? But wait, rationally inexplicable elements are encountered in any science. After all, we know that this is just temporarily unexplained, objected the wanderer. Yes, of course. But it is precisely this that forces many highly advanced scientists, at the end of their lives, to admit science's claim to universal objectivity as unfounded, rationally incomprehensible elements, you know. Remember in Shakespeare, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. The wanderer did not answer. Meanwhile, the sphere became transparent. He made out in it something completely different from what he expected to see. Instead of some products of production, raw materials, and technological resources, the sphere was filled with money, banknotes, coins, bonds, stocks, and credit cards with signs in different languages. All this was spinning and mixing like in the drum of a washing machine. "How much are you ready to invest in me?" asked Economics in a business-like tone. She tried to immediately take the bull by the horns. "Actually, I don't have money with me," answered the wanderer, not understanding the point of this question. "What are you doing in the pyramid without money?" asked Economics, not hiding her spite. "I came to the pyramid not to solve a problem for money." "Nonsense. There is no such problem that is impossible to solve for money. If a problem cannot be solved for money, it means it must be solved for big money." Economics laughed at her own joke. Then she asked, "Don't you know that the rules are set by the one who has the gold?" "I am not sure of that," answered the wanderer, feeling growing irritation. His irritation intensified even more after Economics' subsequent remark. "No money, you are a weakling. The pyramid is not for weaklings. Or do you have something to object?" "Oh, go to hell." The wanderer could not restrain himself. Unexpectedly for him, the surface of the pyramid began to lose its transparency. The wanderer, seeing that he was still on the same step of the pyramid, calmed down. The guide nudged him slightly toward the last sphere on the step. "Here dwells politics. The last Antrreality for you on this step," said the guide, and added, "The navigator says that you know almost nothing about this entity. However, like many others, you must know that politics has many faces, and exactly because of that she is hypocritical. It is not her fault. It is her essence. She has never been different and never will be. For politics is carried out by people, and they have needs which they are forced to satisfy. And the opportunities for this for them far exceed the opportunities of non-politicians. And who can resist? However, do not forget, without her, chaos would ensue." Finally, this sphere also became transparent. The wanderer approached closer and saw that the whole sphere was filled with posters, with mottos and slogans, with high goals and promises. The voice he heard came from somewhere above. "We are glad to see you. Are you tired? Do you want to come in to rest?" From his experience, the wanderer knew that if you don't need anything vitally important from politics, it is better not to approach her. She can quickly climb onto your neck and start steering you. "Thank you, I'll stand here," answered the wanderer, raising his right hand with the palm toward the sphere, either greeting or defending himself. "Well, as you wish. To the free freedom. We are for free choice. We have no dictates." It seemed she could continue like this endlessly, but suddenly changed vector. "How can we help you? We are here for this. We, sparing no effort, toil, bearing the heavy burden of responsibility, so that simple wanderers like you would feel good and proud." It was audible how politics' voice filled with artistic inspiration. Her very words already sounded like a song. There was no need to return to bread anymore. "Actually, I am looking for the Antrreality that can help me remember my goal. We all have a common goal to make life better and more cheerful. Don't you think so?" The glass clouded over immediately after the question was voiced. The wanderer's answer did not interest politics. The wanderer turned around and saw how the color of the surrounding space turned from light yellow-green into pure green. The wanderer turned around and saw how the color of the surrounding space turned from light yellow-green into pure green. Step 5. Looking around. The wanderer discovered that this step of the pyramid little resembled the previous one. Its walls, expanding upwards, were quite far from him and could be distinguished with difficulty. The entire area of the step was divided into 9 unequal sections, in the center of each of which a pyramid rose. Not an inverted one, but the most ordinary kind. All the pyramids were dissimilar to each other. They were wider and narrower, higher and lower. Besides, they differed in shades. In each pyramid, there was a small window. When the wanderer, accompanied by the guide, approached the first pyramid and looked into the window, he saw a room inside that, as it seemed to him, exceeded the external appearance of the pyramid in size. The wanderer was no longer surprised by anything. Here dwells the Antrreality named Justice. She is proud that she is related to Themis and speaks in the name of fairness and justice. But, alas, this is not always so. Last time, I was the guide for a wanderer who spent 9 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. He sought the answer to the questions tormenting him from this Antrreality. The guide interrupted his story because the light in the pyramid's window became brighter. He waved his hand to the wanderer, gesturing to direct his attention to the window. The voice sounding from the window possessed a commanding confidence. Whom do you blame for your problems? The wanderer blamed no one for his losses. Such is my fate. I blame no one but myself. Do you admit your guilt? The wanderer understood that the verdict would be pronounced with the next phrase. He was not ready for such a speedy trial. Can I ask a question before I answer? Ask. You have already acted as the prosecutor by saying that you blame yourself. Before you admit your guilt, you have the right to act as your own defender, said Justice in a dispassionate voice. Then answer. Are your laws equal for everyone? For some time, there was complete silence. Finally, Justice's voice resounded. Laws are not equal for everyone, but everyone must be equal before the law. Clarify, requested the wanderer. I cannot judge by identical laws actions committed by a child and an adult, a victim and an aggressor, the mentally healthy and the insane. I have different laws for them, but everyone is equal before the law determined for them. Your Honor, do you take upon yourself the responsibility to determine before which law I must admit myself guilty? Under which article of the code am I to answer? I will exercise the right to remain silent, answered Justice in full confidence of her right. Then I too will exercise this right. A long silence reigned. Finally, Justice uttered, I waive my right to ask the concluding question, since you do not fit into the letter of the law. My verdict, not subject to jurisdiction. The light in the pyramid's window went out. The wanderer and the guide hurried to the next pyramid. In its window, the wanderer saw an ordinary school classroom, as he remembered it from childhood. The guide commented on nothing. He merely uttered one word, school. When the light became brighter, the classroom still remained empty. The voice that came from the depths of the pyramid seemed familiar to him. Are you late again? The wanderer remembered the intonations of his homeroom teacher. Whatever else, he always had problems with school discipline. By the inertia of reflex, he wanted to lie about something. But the wanderer restrained himself in time. Yes, I am late. As always, the wanderer squeezed out with a bitter chuckle. Do you remember what happens to violators of discipline when they grow up? Sounded the voice of school strictly. The wanderer remembered how long he waited for the completion of school. The beginning of the school week, the beginning of the school quarter, the beginning of the school year. He always perceived as the beginning of serving a sentence, for it wasn't clear what. But he knew there would be no amnesty, and the sentence would have to be served from bell to bell. I understood that school is always right, answered the wanderer with irony in his voice. School sighed with satisfaction. The wanderer expected the last question, hoping to free himself sooner from school's senseless interrogation. Now do you understand why you are here? Asked school, with a significant intonation in her voice. To be honest, the wanderer did not understand what school had to do with it. remaining far behind in his gradually returning memory. He tried not to remember his school. There they tried to bring him to the average, which he stubbornly resisted. But now for the first time, he thought that, perhaps, school had succeeded in its efforts. After all, he really had become one of the majority. I admit my defeat and regret it. The light in the pyramid's window went out, and the wanderer thought that now everyone remained with their own. He exchanged glances with the guide and followed him to the next pyramid. Here dwells the guild, an entity arrogant and full of aplomb. I don't know why visiting her fell to you. At this moment the window in the pyramid lit up. To the wanderer's gaze appeared a room full of hand tools for various crafts. The wanderer also didn't understand why he had to answer the questions of this Antrreality. He harbored no inclination for working with his hands. Do you know what you lost by ignoring the practice of arts and crafts? Asked a muffled low female voice. I wrote poems, objected the wanderer. You typed on a keyboard. That doesn't count. If you had at least written on paper with a pen, but like that, on a computer, it doesn't count. What did you do with your hands? Fingers. Besides picking your nose. Guild clearly did not suffer from an excess of tact and politeness. I don't understand what you are about, answered the wanderer, bewildered. He really didn't understand what Guild was driving at. Do you understand how handicraft differs from masturbation? Asked Guild quite rudely and added, have you really never heard the phrase fine motor skills? Heard it, of course, but I don't understand what that has to do with this, spoke the wanderer perplexedly. You never drew, never sculpted, never whittled, and in general, didn't even try to make something with your own hands. And you want to pass the whole pyramid. You don't have to answer. Guild finished her interrogation disappointed. The light in the pyramid's window went out. The wanderer looked confused, but was glad that he remained on the same step. Now we will approach the pyramid where the Antrreality named University dwells. This entity is even haughtier than Guild. She might ignore you altogether, but since she is here, you are obliged to appear before her. If she does not condescend to communicate with you, it is still better than if you ignore her. Meanwhile, the wanderer saw that in the pyramid they approached, the light in the window was already burning quite brightly. Looking into the window, he saw that the walls of the pyramid were hung with portraits of all sorts of scientists, and the whole looked more like a pantheon than a place of enlightenment. Is your diploma with you? Sounded a voice from right under the dome of the pyramid. No, I didn't take it with me, answered the wanderer with a chuckle. Since he graduated from the university at his parents' insistence, receiving a master's degree and opening his own business, he had never once taken out his diploma. Do you suppose that without presenting a diploma, anyone will speak with you seriously? The wanderer was glad that this was already the second question, even if not seriously. As long as they speak, smiled the wanderer. University's haughty tone amused him. It is a pity that I do not have the right to strip you of your diploma. But if I did, what would you do then? I would give back the diploma and forget that it existed. The light in the pyramid's window went out abruptly. You have learned well that the Antrrealities are more interested in you than you are in them, said the guide. But don't relax. Every wanderer has several Antrrealities that have an extraordinary influence on him. You haven't encountered yours yet. They approached the next pyramid on the fifth step. The light in its window was already burning. The wanderer looked into the window. Inside he saw that the room was filled with all sorts of instruments and devices for carrying out measurements. Here were rulers, scales of different purposes and systems, thermometers, chronometers, pressure gauges, protractors, and objects completely unfamiliar to the wanderer. Here dwells metrology, an entity fascinated by her purpose. She treats it as a calling, dedicates all her time to measurements. That which is impossible to measure, she considers nonsense. The wanderer listened to the guide with curiosity. This Antrreality seems harmless, he said, continuing to examine the instruments inside the pyramid. Metrology's voice asked, "Is it interesting?" "Yes. Since childhood, I loved making various measurements. It occupied and calmed me. It was surprising that measurements made 3 times could give slightly different results each time." "Ah, spot on. Measurement is an art. And what did you do to achieve accuracy?" "Searched for instruments more suitable for the specific case." "Bravo. Did you become convinced that anything at all can be measured? That everything in the world is measurable?" The wanderer thought that this question was tricky. To say yes to please the Antrreality meant to act against his conscience. To say no could anger this entity. He remembered the trick in questionnaires when the immeasurable was proposed. To be evaluated in points from 1 to 10. "Yes, 5 out of 10, said the wanderer, and saw that the light in the window went out. The guide looked at the wanderer and remarked, "You can be cunning, more than the Antrrealities." "Well, yes. It's anyone's game here." They moved on to the next pyramid. "Be careful here. In this pyramid is located the entity named Army. She considers herself the strongest of all Antrrealities and loves submission. She rejoices when she manages to dumbfound a wanderer, catching him off guard." The wanderer had not served in the army, but he had heard a lot about it. The light in the pyramid's window shone like a searchlight and blinded his eyes. "What is this sloppiness, soldier?" sounded the sharp voice of Army. "Repeat. Where are you right now?" "In the pyramid of Antrrealities, ma'am." "On the 5th step of the quest, ma'am." "As you were. Answer according to form." "Why is the button unfastened, soldier?" "No, ma'am. The button is not unfastened, ma'am. It was torn off and lost on the march, ma'am." Ma'am. Army mocked the wanderer. "Relax, soldier. At ease. Do you regret that you missed the honorable opportunity to serve in the army?" "No, ma'am." The wanderer continued to play the role imposed on him. Army swore and cut the light in the pyramid. "They have nothing to grab you by," remarked the guide with a chuckle. "Okay. Let's see how you hold up further. Now the Antrreality bureaucracy awaits us. She is more resourceful than the previous entity. Army is direct and brutal. Bureaucracy is cunning and seductive. She tries to create the impression that she exists for you, works for you, and cares for you. Actually, that is why she arose." "Well, I think you know all this anyway." When the wanderer and the guide approached the pyramid of bureaucracy, the light in the window was already shimmering softly. "How can I help?" sounded the politely obliging voice of bureaucracy. "I am here to remember my goal and find a solution to achieve it." "We are here for this very reason, to help wanderers." Bureaucracy blossomed in a smile. "You only have to fill out a few forms and write an application." "Procedure, you know." Bureaucracy smiled apologetically again. "Can you fill out the forms yourself? Or do you need samples for filling them out?" "I'll manage," answered the wanderer, accepting the sheets of paper and pen extended from the window. "Well, if you don't need anything else, I am glad that I could be useful to you." The light in the pyramid's window went out. The wanderer, standing for a minute, rolled the received papers into a tube and shoved them back to this Antrreality back into the window. "Useless, but fast," he remarked to the guide. Suddenly, he discovered again that the guide had begun to look even older, and his beard no longer seemed short. The pyramid they approached now had the smallest window. "Here is the Antrreality passport. She doesn't look at people. Your passport number is enough for her." "And if a person doesn't remember?" asked the wanderer. "Then it is better for him to be born again. In the system without a passport, you are nobody. Actually, I warned you that in case of deep dissatisfaction of any of the Antrrealities, you will find yourself on the first step again. Oh well, this Antrreality is not so harmful. In general, it is unprofitable for her, as for others, to lose clients." A dim light beamed from the pyramid's window. "Your ID number." A dry voice resounded from the window. 123,456,789. The Wanderer, actually like the majority of people on planet Earth, remembered his passport number by heart. When issued, the voice continued its interrogation. This the Wanderer definitely did not remember, since he had to renew his passport twice. "I don't remember exactly," the Wanderer muttered confusedly. "Not terrible," said the voice. "Then full date of birth." This the Wanderer remembered. After he reported his date of birth, the dim light went out. And now the last Antrreality of this step. This is Empire. In reality, she is older than the other Antrrealities of this step, but she doesn't like to admit her decrepitude. They approached the last pyramid of the fifth step, and up close the Wanderer saw how great the Pyramid of Empire was. Its window was located so high that the Wanderer could not look into it. This Antrreality maintained unapproachability. "Who are you?" resounded the imperious voice of Empire. "I am a simple wanderer seeking my goal," he answered, trying to preserve calmness and dignity. "We will give you a new goal. Here, you will find a new support and a new home. Without us you are nobody. Do you want to join true greatness? Your gracious offer is very tempting, but I have other intentions," the Wanderer squeezed out, striving to maintain parity. "Don't delude yourself about yourself. You are nobody and your name is no way. You are either with us, or you will perish. Have you not understood this yet?" "I think that I won't understand." The Wanderer's answer hung in the air. Looking back, he saw that the space had begun to acquire a turquoise hue. The landscape was changing before his eyes. The Wanderer understood that he had ended up on the next step. It was changing before his eyes. The Wanderer understood that he had ended up on the next step. Step 6. Now we are, perhaps, on the most decisive step for you. 11 Antrrealities have settled here, and it is highly likely that one of them will become the defining one for completing the quest. The Wanderer looked around. The step constituted a huge, cobblestone-paved square, along the perimeter of which were located buildings with architecture of various epochs and styles. The windows of the buildings were lit, and it seemed that life was seething inside them. Some shadows flickered in the windows, and an indistinct noise drifted out. Here it is not important from where to start the acquaintance with the Antrrealities of this step. Choose any building, and then we will continue clockwise, said the guide and gestured around the buildings surrounding the square. The Wanderer decided to head toward the building in the windows of which he noticed particular animation. Entering inside, he saw human figures scurrying back and forth, whose faces were hidden by masks made of mirrors. In their hands they carried stacks of papers, and from behind closed doors the clatter of some machines was heard. He turned to the guide with a question in his eyes. In this building topography has located itself, the Antrreality that changed the world. This entity finally liberated the word from the control of man. Now the printed and replicated word became a new power. The influence of the printed word surprised even the authors of the texts. They became idols of millions. The Wanderer looked around, not understanding with whom he would have to speak. Suddenly a figure in a mirror mask passing by quickly shoved a sheet of paper into his hand, with a paragraph printed on it. The Wanderer read, "What are you seeking here?" He pulled a pen out of his pocket, which remained with him from the visit to bureaucracy, and wrote on the same sheet, "My goal." Another figure, exactly like the first, shoved a second sheet of paper into his hand, where it was printed. "Do you think it is here?" "No," wrote the Wanderer briefly. The third sheet shoved into his hand repeated the first question. "So what are you seeking here?" At that moment, all the figures scurrying in the corridors disappeared somewhere. The noise subsided, and silence reigned. The Wanderer understood that his answer interested no one here. Leaving topography, the Wanderer, accompanied by the guide, approached the next building. Here dwells the entity named standardization. In principle, useful and harmless, but arrogant to the extreme, and uniqueness often irritates her. She believes that exceptionality is not justified in the modern world. They entered a building where silence and uniformity of interior decoration reigned. The wanderer heard a monotonous voice. "Do you consider yourself not like everyone else?" Having reached the 6th step, the wanderer was not all that sure of his distinctiveness. But still he could not reconcile himself with the thought of his own mediocrity, and answered evasively, "I am no longer sure of anything." "You don't believe in the universality of unification." "Neither in the universality of unification, nor in the universality of uniqueness," chuckled the wanderer. "You are funny," Standardization pronounced thoughtfully, and added, "Go already. I have no more questions." The wanderer hastened to leave the room before the Antrreality changed her mind. Accompanied by the guide, he approached the next building. It was not too high, but looked large and gloomy. In this building industry is located. She knows how to use the achievements of previous Antrrealities, both metrology and university and school and economics. She became completely necessary for people, but tries to turn them into her slaves. So be careful. The wanderer entered inside the building of industry. Before him, he saw a multitude of deafeningly humming machines, machine tools, and assembly lines. Suddenly through the noise he discerned a voice shouting right into his ear. "What do you need?" "I don't know myself what I need here," shouted the wanderer in response. "Do not approach the machine tools. It can be dangerous," shouted the voice and added, "Have you ever worked on machine tools?" "No. My activity was connected with the service sphere." "So you never produced anything?" Condescending disdain was heard in industry's voice. "I know that I did for people that which they needed," answered the wanderer, trying to express confidence in his voice. The roar of machines and the smell of burnt oil in the space of industry became intolerable. The wanderer went outside. The next building he found himself in front of looked pretentiously significant, although it clearly wasn't. Here resides the entity named newspaper. Essentially, she is the daughter of topography, but she considers herself the most influential Antrreality. The wanderer entered the open door. Inside, as in the topography building, many figures darted along the corridors and floors. They also reminded the wanderer of the figures from topography, with the difference that their faces were covered not by mirrored, but by impenetrable grey masks. The wanderer thought that in the previous ones he could, at least, see his own reflection. In these, nothing was reflected. One of these figures handed him a newspaper. It contained many meaningless words. Yet the top headline, printed in particularly large letters, attracted his attention. "Will artificial intelligence replace humans?" In his memory, this question had indeed been the most popular in the press for the last 6 months. The wanderer did not understand how this concerned him. He answered a question with a question. "And what significance does my humble opinion have on this matter?" The next newspaper shoved into his hands carried the following headline: "What will happen to the world in 2025? I don't know what will happen to me. What do you want from me anyway?" The wanderer continued to answer a question with a question. The headline of the next newspaper continued to inquire, "Is the world getting worse?" The wanderer thought that the world certainly wasn't getting better. "Why is newspaper scaring me?" thought the wanderer, but aloud he uttered, "If people create the world, then everything depends on them." Figures without faces continued to scurry along the corridors of the newspaper building. No one else shoved anything into the wanderer's hands. He left the building. Returning to the square, he saw that the guide was looking at him somewhat suspiciously. The guide said, "The navigator in my pocket is vibrating nervously. It seems that we are now approaching the decisive Antrreality in your quest. Actually, in this building dwells the entity named Medicine. Looking at you, I don't understand in what way you are so dependent on her." "Okay, she is already waiting for you." The wanderer entered the building. Dim light seeped through the blinds on the windows. The corridor smelled of sterility. The wanderer stopped at the office door, hesitating to enter. From the office a voice resounded, as if already heard before. "Have you arrived already? You may enter." The office met him with the neutral light of a lead lamp. The wanderer sat down. He still didn't understand why he had been called. "I would like to speak with you about your daughter," began Medicine, not raising her eyes. She was examining some printout, as if looking for justification on it. "But has something happened?" "Nothing new," said Medicine. She finally looked at the wanderer. The gaze was surgically precise, without blame, but also without pity. "You know," she continued, "that your daughter has been in a coma for 3 years. You know that her vitals are stable. But you don't know that for the last few months, we have been recording something strange, even frightening." The wanderer remained silent. Something inside him shrank, and fragments of memory flashed in his head. When you are absent, all her data is normal. Heart rate, breathing, pressure, neurosignals. Sometimes we even forget that before us is a patient in an unconscious state. Medicine paused and shifted her gaze directly to the wanderer. "But as soon as you arrive, a breakdown occurs. Tachycardia, ragged breathing, trembling in the muscles, the sensation that the body is fighting for something that is no longer there. That she is fighting, but not with the disease, but with you." The silence hanging in the air was broken by the wanderer's question. "What do you mean to say?" "I want to say," Medicine spoke more clearly now, as if defending herself, "that she is suffering. Suffering from your presence. This is not just a hypothesis. It is recorded. It is a medical fact." She straightened up in the chair. The line of her shoulders became stricter. "If you do not give consent to turn off the life support system, I, unfortunately, will have to forbid your visits. Not as an enemy. As a doctor, I am obliged to protect the patient even from her father." The wanderer said nothing. He felt the chair under him losing stability, as if the office was sinking into the ground. Medicine was silent. The wanderer walked out of the office and collapsed onto a chair standing opposite the door. Now he remembered everything. He remembered how he got married at the age of 20, being a student, almost a boy, and at 21, he became a father. From childhood, his daughter became the meaning of his life. She was his joy and pride, and there was something to be proud of. From early years the girl attracted the attention of those around her, which filled him with delight. The best student in the class, the winner of district Olympiad, and how she danced, a sight for sore eyes. And now she is a graduating student, a beauty, slender, a real top model, and smart, a contender for the gold medal. Her father doted on her. He worked very hard to provide his girl with all the best. And for her 18th birthday, and to mark the successful completion of school, he bought and gave her a very expensive, luxurious, and prestigious car. There was no limit to her joy. But on her very first independent drive, something incomprehensible happens. Practically without any visible reason, on a turn, she loses control and crashes into a concrete pole. The accident was terrible, and although all safety systems worked, she was brought to the hospital in an unconscious state. The doctors did everything so she wouldn't die. And she didn't die. But she didn't return to consciousness. 3 years passed. All her friends who visited her in the first months of the coma had practically forgotten about her. After all, life goes on. But for the father, life stopped. He sold his business to get the opportunity to spend more time near his daughter. Over 3 years, he spent all the money providing the best conditions for his still living daughter. After all, she was still breathing. Then he remembered more. For almost a year now, he returned every day from the hospital to an empty house. His wife could not forgive him for buying the car for their daughter for her 18th birthday. He remembered how on the eve of the purchase, she begged him not to do it. He remembered her words. "Where are you rushing to? It's too early for her." As if she sensed trouble, He remembered how his wife opposed the sale of the business to prolong their daughter's existence in a coma. Let her go already. Don't torture her. Please. 2 years have passed already. Look at what she has become. The doctors really gave no chance. But she was still breathing. The apartment was semi-dark, quiet. Only the ticking of the clock. For almost a year the wanderer hadn't turned on the overhead light. Now he stood at the door to his daughter's room, which was empty. Not a ward. Not a hospital. Just that room where she once read, did homework, slept. An open bookshelf remained, and on it a thin, warm book with a colorful binding. He came closer, took it in his hands. Sergei Aksakov, The Scarlet Flower. His daughter's favorite fairy tale in childhood. He opened it. His fingers trembled, and suddenly a voice, indistinct, as through water, childlike, unsolicited, clear. Daddy, I want a flower. A scarlet one. He froze, looked around. The room was empty. He looked into the book again and again the voice, a little quieter, but with the same despair. I want a flower. A scarlet one. He sank to the floor. The book slipped from his hands. He wasn't crying. He just couldn't breathe. Now he sat on the chair in the pyramid of the Antrrealia medicine, and remembered everything. How traveling light, taking nothing with him, he set off there, not knowing where. To find that very thing, the scarlet flower, to fulfill his daughter's last will. Of course, it was madness, but wasn't it an even greater madness to remain in an empty apartment? Someone told him that somewhere there is such a quest. The prize for completing, which is the fulfillment of any wish, like in The Zone from Andrei Tarkovsky's film Stalker. But that's a movie. And what did he lose when everything was already lost? And here, now he is on the 6th step of the inverted pyramid in the abode of medicine. He decided to return to the office. Well, remembered why you came to the pyramid, yes. Do you understand that medicine is powerless here, yes? What do you hope for? For a miracle. The wanderer did not remember how he ended up outside the medicine building. The guide looked at him with sympathy. The wanderer saw that the guide had aged noticeably. His beard was gray. Do you really want to bring your daughter a scarlet flower? Did you make the decision to go through this quest specifically for this? The guide looked astonished. Having been silent for a while, he continued. Actually, this doesn't concern me. But know this, many trials still await you. I am ready, answered the wanderer, and added, forward. Together with the guide, he approached the next building. Here dwells National State. I think you don't need anything explained. And anyway, pick up the pace of moving through the pyramid. Otherwise, on the last steps, you will have to carry me on your back. The guide chuckled bitterly. The wanderer entered inside the building. It amazed him that the interior space unimaginably exceeded the external dimensions of the National State Building. He saw before him an unfolded landscape, including forests and rivers, mountains and valleys, cities and villages. And all this was charmingly beautiful. The wanderer involuntarily remembered the Antrrealia named language. Should be on guard, thought the wanderer when he heard a voice. Where are you heading, wanderer? I am looking for a flower. A scarlet one. Maybe I will find it here. Here, you will find everything you want. You have ended up in the best state in the world. Do you want to become one of us? I don't think I can. I have long felt myself a cosmopolitan, answered the wanderer, trying not to irritate this entity. Lah, so you are rootless, a tumbleweed, without roots and memory. The voice of National State sounded threatening. I feel like a free citizen of the world, answered the wanderer, and felt how a sudden gust of wind carried him out onto the square of the 6th step. Good, said the guide. Let's go further. In this building, the entity named Ideology is located. She is in direct kinship with the previous Antrrealia, and, you know, they get along not badly. However, Ideology gets along not only with unitary states, She tries to be useful and in demand everywhere. The wanderer entered the building. The entire interior room was plastered with posters and slogans, like politics had, only incomparably more and denser. The train of his associations was interrupted by an insinuating voice. "Have you already understood who you are?" Ideology asked the first question. "And who am I?" The wanderer tried to answer a question with a question. Before, this had helped him. Stop answering a question with a question. Ideology's voice sounded with unbending demandingness. Don't complicate things. Everything is extremely simple and clear. If you don't know who you are, how do you intend to live on? Well, somehow I will. As one writer said, after all, it has never been so that it was Noah Hosek was a bad citizen, not a patriot. And you? Are you a patriot? I love the place where I was born and lived, but that does not apply to you. I will never be a patriot of ideology. Exiting the refuge of ideology turned out to be even easier than entering. The main thing was not to let her befuddle you. Finding himself on the square of the sixth step, the wanderer sighed with relief. Don't relax. There are still many obstacles on this step. Now you will enter the building where financial system has settled. Be careful. She managed to slow down many wanderers through the pyramid, said the guide when they approached the next building. Entering it, the wanderer saw such a quantity of money as economics from the fourth step had not even dreamed of. What do you know about money? Asked financial system quietly. Well, they say that money is the blood of the economy. The wanderer tried to answer a question with a question. Blessed is he who believes, the Antrrealia remarked with a chuckle. And what do you think yourself? Asked financial system after a pause. The wanderer seemed to burst. I think that money has become the blood not only of the economy, but of the entire modern civilization. It is no longer just a tool of exchange. They have turned into a universal equivalent of value, determining the very possibility of existence. For a moment the wanderer stopped, then continued. Without money, there is no access to food, water, housing, medicine, in general, to life. Art, music, cinema exist only if commercially successful. Time is money. People sell the time of their life for a salary. The rich can buy the time of others, and the poor are forced to trade theirs. Money does not just service civilization, it has recoded it. The wanderer fell silent. Financial system was also silent. Then she hissed, "Go away." The wanderer left the building. The guide looked at him with wide-open eyes. "Well, you really gave it to her," he said, and both moved to the next building. "If you continue like this, I will definitely die of old age before we reach the last Antrrealia. I beg you, be more restrained. In this building, the stock exchange is located. The closest relative of financial system," said the guide and added, "Try to manage it more quickly." The wanderer entered the stock exchange building. A roar of boiling adrenaline stood there. Traders with trembling hands, rushing between monitors, literally strove to knock him off his feet. A voice, sounding right in his ear, pronounced, "Well, understood how money is made from money? No. But it's captivating. Beats a circus magician. You bet. This is really magic. To make 1,000 out of 100. Do you want to try?" "Actually, yes. And what is needed for this?" asked the wanderer, experiencing growing excitement. "Mere trifles." "Do you have a certain sum of money with you?" asked Stock Exchange. "Oh, there is absolutely nothing." Stock Exchange lost interest in the wanderer. The wanderer, backing away, left the Stock Exchange building. "Could you really have gotten stuck there if there had been money?" asked the guide. The wanderer answered, "Phew, it was like some kind of spell." Having walked a little, both found themselves opposite a building with some kind of crooked architecture. In this strange building resides a strange entity named colonialism. She has long wandered the steps of the pyramid, but she took root here. A nasty and cunning woman, The guide spoke warily. The wanderer entered the building. Inside stretched an endless field. On it, he saw a multitude of toiling people. Among them were children too. Not far from the wanderer, a convertible stopped, and a well-dressed and well-groomed woman stepped out of it. She addressed the wanderer. "How did you find yourself in our parts?" The wanderer understood that she was the mistress of this space. He answered, "I am looking for a scarlet flower, which my daughter asked me to bring." The Antrrealia exchanged glances with her companion, who was also the driver of the car. He shook his head negatively. "You won't find it here. There is nothing here at all, except these unhappy people whom we are trying to help," said colonialism, and swept her hand, pointing toward the working people. "After all, they are so backward," the lady sighed. "And you want to help them?" She turned to the wanderer. The whole picture depressed the wanderer. He answered, "I think they could manage their lives themselves." "So what? Abandon them to their fate." Colonialism snorted, and added, "I cannot leave them alone in our terrible world. At least we provide them with work." She turned and returned to the convertible. A few seconds later, only a cloud of dust remained where the car had been. The wanderer left the building of colonialism. "Now we will approach the last building on this step. There lives the entity named modern slavery. It does not resemble the slavery of ancient history, but only outwardly. In essence, it is the same thing, only disguised. It always walks hand in hand with its neighbor colonialism. They both keep making their way higher and higher up the steps of the pyramid. Well, you will see everything yourself." The wanderer entered the last building on this step. Inside he saw nothing extraordinary. No horrors of slave owning. Cruelty had become plus comme il faut. "Do you think that slaves suffer?" The voice asking the question sounded quite sincere. The wanderer answered, "Well, they certainly aren't rejoicing. Oh, come now. They suffer precisely when they are led out of slavery. Remember how Moses' tribesmen reproached him when he led his people out of Egypt. With what trembling they recalled the fish they were given at the end of daily slave labor. Do you really think that all people dream of freedom? Man is born to be free." The wanderer pronounced the famous slogan, shrugging his shoulders. "Ah, what charming naivety. Look here." One not unknown ruler of a huge empire with pride and rapture compared his work to the labor of a slave on galleys, and his entire people applauded him, not even dreaming in their thoughts of exiting the servile state. Even right as they squeezed the slave out of themselves drop by drop their whole lives. Do you hear well? Drop by drop. Taking their time to enjoy the joy of slavery a little bit longer. Or have you not met people ready for slavish submission for the sake of a guaranteed existence? If you are right, then perhaps Paul Valery was also right when he remarked, "What is the universe? An error in the purity of non-being." The wanderer didn't even notice how he ended up outside. He saw that the space filled with a sky azure color, and understood that he was on the next step of the pyramid. "Are we already on the 7th step?" he asked the guide. "Not exactly. I need to explain something to you." The guide, having aged even more, looked uncertain. Step 7. Half. Looking around on the new step, the wanderer saw that the entire square was covered with shards of glass, metal, and concrete, as if after the explosion of a powerful bomb. However, it was surrounded by a wall of water, illuminating the space of the step with a beautiful light blue color. Despite the obstacle created by the explosion, he wanted to walk up and touch the surface of the water wall. The guide seemed to guess his thoughts. "Approaching the wall of water can be deadly dangerous," he pronounced and added, "There dwell Antrrealities deadly to humans. This is the only step so far where entities deadly to humans dwell. Some are almost invisible, like box jellyfish, lying in wait for their victims, hiding in the water. Some, red-brown like dinoflagellates, are capable of causing mass death without hiding. creating dead zones, and also inflicting significant economic damage. No wanderer is obliged to approach the Antrrealities on this step, but nevertheless, these entities manage to ruin millions, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of human lives. I cannot forbid you from approaching them. It is your choice. I am only obliged to warn you. The wanderer decided not to tempt fate, although the thought spun in his brain that nothing terrible could happen to him. Good, agreed the wanderer. We can go further. At that same moment, he saw the light blue color of the space thicken and turn into dark blue. Step 8. Looking around, he found himself in a huge room filled with computers and monitors. Glancing at the guide, he saw before him a profoundly old, but still vigorous man. Now we are on the 8th step of the inverted pyramid of Antrrealities. Here you will have to pass 13 obstacles. Perhaps this will not be difficult for you, since you were born before them, and they haven't had time to process you yet. The guide thought for a minute, then added, although, who knows? And after a pause repeated in thoughtfulness, who knows? The wanderer and the guide sat down in gaming chairs, opposite a large monitor glowing in the semi-darkness of the 8th step. The first entity that will ask you a question is called audiovisualization. By the way, I forgot to say, the navigator reported that starting from this step, it is sufficient for you to answer only one question from each Antrreality. I have, of course, heard this name, but I don't fully understand what its essence is. Will you clarify? There isn't much to explain here. A picture created by an algorithm, an illusion, a simulacrum. Ah, well, yes. Indeed, everything is clear, chuckled the wanderer. At this time, the monitor screen began to demonstrate pictures more beautiful than life itself. A voice from the speakers pronounced, "Do you know how to use Photoshop?" The wanderer remembered that to promote his business, he had to master Photoshop for processing photographs used in advertising, and filters for creating special effects captivated him very much at some point. But after the accident that happened to his daughter, he had never once used the image processing program. Lord, how long ago that was, thought the wanderer, but aloud he answered, "Yes, I do." "You may go further," said audiovisualization, and the monitor screen went blank. Without getting up from the chairs, the wanderer and the guide rolled over to the next monitor. Here the Antrreality charisma awaits you. She loves to seduce. But remember, you see her, but she does not see you. She flirts not with you, but with the video camera. The face of a very pretty girl with sincere and burning eyes appeared on the screen. Her magical voice pronounced, "Hi, I am glad that you found time for me too. I hope that I will turn out to be useful for you," said charisma and asked, with a charming smile on her lips, "You are not in a hurry?" The wanderer wanted to tell this charming Antrreality that he was not in a hurry, but, feeling an elbow blow to his side from the guide, literally cried out, "I'm in a hurry, I'm in a hurry." The screen went blank. Both guests of the 8th step moved to the next monitor. Now the Antrreality named Auga Presentation will ask you her question. In essence, she is a master at creating avatars. "Have you had occasion to create your avatar?" asked the guide. The wanderer did not have time to answer, since the face of Auga Presentation had already appeared on the screen. She looked strict and demanding. In an imperious voice, she asked, "Have you thought about how others see you?" "That hasn't worried me for a long time," answered the wanderer, hinting that he was not her client. The screen went blank. "We are moving along well. Maybe you won't even have to carry me on your back on the last step," said the guide with a smile. And they moved further. "Here you will meet with an entity who is convinced that Dostoevsky, who through the lips of Prince Mishkin said, 'Beauty will save the world,' was indeed a visionary and spoke of the algorithmic world. And beauty is that which forces one to click with a mouse. Mishkin's beauty joked the guide, playing on the word mouse mish in Russian, and added, "Her name is Aesthetics." The wanderer turned to the monitor. Amazingly beautiful little fish swam across its screen. It was proposed to shoot at them from a harpoon gun. He wanted to click the mouse, but the wanderer restrained himself. "What's with you? Don't know how to use a mouse?" resounded the question from the monitor. "I don't like to shoot," answered the wanderer. The screen went blank. The wanderer rolled away from the monitor and bumped into another with the back of his chair. Turning around, he saw rows of emojis on the screen. Clenched fists with thumbs up and down, hearts of different suits, and many, many others. He glanced at the guide. The latter commented, "This Antrreality is called algomorality. She has nothing in common with conscience. She is not from that opera at all. Her task is to force you to click the mouse, to approve, support, express sympathy, or vice versa, indignation, dissatisfaction, or angry condemnation. In short, to demonstrate your algorithmic moral position. The main thing is that you click." From the monitor resounded the question, "Have you decided on a moral assessment?" "With a moral assessment of what?" asked the wanderer. "What is the difference?" rhetorically pronounced algomorality, and turned off the monitor. The wanderer stood up from the chair, walked aside, and, tilting his head back, closed his eyes. The guide, approaching him, asked quietly, "Did something happen? I cannot understand. Are they all twins? Or is this a single multiple entity? In essence, they all want one and the same thing from me." My response, or more precisely a click. My reaction. "But in reality, they want to force me to serve them," said the wanderer, and after a short pause added, "How many more of them are there? Are they all like this?" The guide answered in a voice not expressing certainty. The appearance of these Antrrealities intensified sharply with the arrival of the internet. It compressed space and time, reducing distances and accelerating the speed of access to information. Such pressure became unbearable for many. Escapism became a means of stabilization and maintaining the illusion of being. Algorithmic Antrrealities began to multiply ceaselessly. In reality, they are already beyond counting. But accessible to you are only those with which you are at least somehow acquainted. And however many of them you encounter, they are not dangerous for your mission. Not one. Except for the last Antrreality on the last step. But surprises are possible. If you are ready, then let's hurry up. There are still many of them. Together they approached the next monitor. The guide continued. Here the entity named Gamification will ask you her question. It seemed to me that she should be well known to you. And indeed, the monitor screen was covered by a carpet of familiar icons. Poker, dice, roulette, backgammon. But also all kinds of shooters, strategies, empires, and much, much more. In his chest, the wanderer suddenly felt an already completely forgotten vague excitement. As if there wasn't enough air, and his breathing involuntarily became deeper. His hand reached for the mouse by itself. "Which game do you love most of all?" He heard a deliberately neutral voice, allegedly not pushing toward anything. "I didn't come here to play," the wanderer reacted sharply, jerking his hand away from the mouse. The screen went blank, and he resolutely moved to the next monitor. Here Algo-Emotion has entrenched herself. An entity imitating feelings. She pretends that she experiences instead of you, so that you don't suffer. This Antrreality performs her work so deftly that she remains invisible to the internet user. You don't even guess about her. The wanderer looked at the monitor. The screen was empty. Apart from a few icons of social networks, there was nothing on it. The voice that asked the question seemed just as empty. "Why don't you enter social networks? Your support is awaited there. Or are you indifferent?" "I don't know anyone there," answered the wanderer completely sincerely. After the monitor of Algo-Emotion switched to sleep mode, the wanderer moved to the next Antrreality. We are now at the Antrreality named Format Addiction. She knows how to deprive users of their freedom very deftly. She limits your space and time. And there you are already on a short leash with her. The wanderer did not quite understand what the guide said, and, turning to the monitor, saw rectangles of different sizes periodically updating on the screen. It was about nothing, but his hand reached for the mouse. Can you fit 280 characters in 15 seconds? The wanderer heard the question. He did not understand what this entity wanted from him, and just in case clicked on one of the rectangles floating across the screen. Suddenly, he heard the laughter of the Antrreality, and the screen went blank. Well, did you manage to understand anything? Chuckled the guide. Okay, let's go further. The next monitor was already waiting for them, attracting attention with the flickering of countless multicolored dots on its screen. They were mesmerizing. And on this screen, you see the most hypnotic of all Antrrealities. Her name is Network Addiction. Few people have escaped her charms. In the clutches of this entity is practically all of humanity. The wanderer looked at the monitor like a rabbit at a boa constrictor. Why are you such a rare guest? Asked the Antrreality in a charming voice. I am busy searching for what my daughter asked for, answered the wanderer with an apologetic intonation. You are obliged to know that with me, you will find anything at all, said Network Addiction and disconnected. Together with the guide, they moved to the next monitor. Here dwells Viral Thirst, an entity incredibly clingy, said the guide and added, how can one not recall Pushkin here? Let's light the fires, fill the glasses, let's drown our minds merrily and, having brewed feasts and balls, let's glorify the kingdom of the plague. The wanderer did not fully understand what the guide was talking about. At that moment a voice resounded. And have you yourself never wanted to become all-pervasive, like a virus? The wanderer still did not understand what they wanted from him. I never wanted to feel like a virus, answered the wanderer with disgust. And like a quantum, laughed the Antrreality and turned off the screen. The wanderer moved to the next monitor with a sensation of dizziness and nausea. The guide decided to support him. Don't worry so much. On this step, you are out of danger. Now we are at the monitor where algorithm has settled, an entity generating culture without context. This includes cancel culture, toxicity culture, cyberbullying, the culture of performative activism, and the like. This is not about you. The wanderer calmed down a little, although he understood nothing of what the guide said. At that moment, he heard a voice coming from the monitor. Do you see yourself among others? Are you with us? I don't know even if I see myself among myself. I don't know if I am with myself or long gone already, answered the wanderer, formulating what he felt, even without fully understanding it. The next entity is also not yours. Her name is Alga Loneliness. Your loneliness is not algorithmic, but nostalgic. This Antrreality has no power over you, said the guide as they approached another screen glowing with a gloomy light. Algorithmic loneliness is when context is substituted by content, added the guide. At that moment, the voice of Alga Loneliness resounded. Do you understand that you yourself are to blame for your loneliness? What can an algorithm know about loneliness? The wanderer answered a question with a question out of old habit. This turned out to be sufficient. The screen went blank, and the wanderer and the guide moved to the last monitor on the 8th step. This is the last entity and the last question on this step of the pyramid. Her name is Algaform. That is, form without content, content without context. In essence, it is all the same thing. It is like an onion without the onion inside, just husks. The voice that reached the wanderer pronounced, do you still think to find something inside? And clarified, inside the pyramid. I still hope. The screen went blank, and the space around began to acquire an ultramarine shade of blue. Something had changed. Shade of blue. Something had changed. Step 9. We are on the last step of your quest. Here everything will end. or everything will begin. From here, one does not return to the first step, and here everything depends on you. The wanderer looked around. The ninth step looked almost the same as the previous one. The same monitors were arranged this time in a circle, and in the center stood a large round table, around which stood 3 chairs at equal distances. The guide led him to one of the monitors. Here you will answer the question of the Antrreality named algorithmic self-esteem. She compels network users to replace the capacity for reflexive self-esteem with a digital surrogate, and thus free themselves from unnecessary worries. However, many people didn't particularly complicate their lives with self-analysis before either, calling it unnecessary intellectual reflections. The wanderer looked at the screen. Some statistical graphs and tables with numbers were floating across it. The Antrreality's voice was quite nice. "Are you satisfied with your metrics?" "I am not interested in them," answered the wanderer, thereby ending communication with this entity. The screen went blank, and accompanied by the guide, he moved to the next monitor. Meanwhile, he noticed that the guide had begun to move noticeably slower. It seemed difficult for him to move his legs. The guide also noticed the wanderer's reaction to his changes. "Everything is normal. I am fine. Everything is good." Having been silent for a while, he added, "Here, fake legitimation will ask you a question. This is an entity that creates authority for emptiness. Trust in nothing. It wraps nothing in a convincing cover. If you haven't encountered her directly, then you know her by rumors." The wanderer saw a painfully familiar phrase on the next screen. But what if it's true? He often heard these words from those who wanted to plant doubts. That an outright lie is indeed a lie. A hopeless business, it would seem. But no, quite prosperous. "Do you know that you have been deceived your whole life?" asked the Antrreality in a voice expressing extreme concern and full of sympathy. "I know, and I don't worry about it," answered the wanderer with a chuckle. The screen went blank immediately. Now we are at the monitor representing the Antrreality named Anxiety. "I suppose that here too you will slip through quickly," said the guide in a somewhat hoarse voice now. Then he added, "This is an entity that causes anxiety in you not by a message, but by its absence. You open your smartphone, and there are no new messages. This begins to unnerve you, and you think, 'What is happening?' Well, I think this is not about you. Do you have a smartphone at all?" "No," answered the wanderer thoughtfully, as if remembering something. At that moment, the phrase "new message" flashed on the monitor. The wanderer clicked on the inscription. Inside the message was a question. "Don't you think that you are already lost?" "I am thinking about how fed up I am with you all," answered the wanderer, and the screen instantly went blank. Now you will meet the entity called impulse existence. Also, I think, not about you. After all, you do not live in a chain of responses, where the sequence of your life consists only of reaction impulses to the digital environment. I think you won't even understand her question. Any answer of yours will satisfy her. You are not her client. Do you hear within yourself an impulse of meaning? The wanderer heard the Antrreality's question and quickly answered, as he liked to do, with a question to a question. An impulse of meaning, or the meaning of an impulse. The entity snorted and turned off the screen. "And this entity, you definitely know well," said the guide when they stopped opposite the next monitor. "Her name is Speedwhip," said the guide and continued. "Actually, this Antrreality existed before, but concerned only workaholics and hurriers. Now her influence is ubiquitous. As soon as a user turns on the monitor screen, he falls under the influence of this entity because he feels good is what is fast. So be careful." The wanderer remained silent. Soon a question resounded. "Well, what are you waiting for?" "Waiting for you to turn off your monitor." The Antrreality moved something and disconnected. "Excellent. We are moving to the next Antrreality," said the guide, encouraged by the pace of progress along the step. "Now we are at the entity named multiple attention, Continued the guide. If you have never used split screens, never experienced digital overload, and are not familiar with multitasking, then she won't catch you. Before him, the wanderer saw 3 screens simultaneously, where each of them demonstrated something of its own. The voice that asked him the question also seemed multi-voiced, multi-timbre, and with a phase delay, as if it was stuttering. This made perception difficult. WHWHURRYYU. I am a wanderer through the pyramid, answered the wanderer. Gigigo Oriadi. The screens went blank. Now we have approached the monitor where the entity named Impulse Trap will ask you her question, reported the guide. But I already answered her question, remarked the wanderer with surprise. No, that was the Antrreality named Impulse Existence. They aren't even sisters with this one. The guide fell silent, then added, I will try to explain. You see, Impulse Existence is the environment, and Impulse Trap is the trigger. I still don't understand, answered the wanderer. Impulse Trap is an entity stealing the will by substituting it with a reaction of irritation. Apparently, I will never understand this, answered the wanderer perplexedly. You will understand when the time comes. And here she is herself. The wanderer saw bloody red waves running across the monitor screen. The voice he heard was not affectionate. What the hell are you hanging around here for, useless? The wanderer was taken aback by such a reception. Well, you know, I am actually very glad that I am useless to you, exclaimed the wanderer, but the screen went blank sooner. Very good, spoke the guide, rubbing his noticeably trembling hands. The wanderer thought that the guide looked unwell. He asked, Are you okay? Doubt and anxiety sounded in the wanderer's voice. Absolutely, answered the guide, accompanying the answer with a grimace signifying a smile. Now we will move to the Antrreality with the strange name inertial reaction. What nonsense is this? There is reactivity, and there is inertia. How can they be the same thing simultaneously? Everything is possible here. You see, this entity forces the user's reaction to act by inertia, to react inertially. In short, I think that here to you are not her client. And why do you call people by some inanimate word user? In the digital world, there are no people. There are only users. Okay, she already hears us. Well, did you find out who I am? Inertial reaction asked the wanderer, smiling condescendingly, and added, You don't have to answer me. Go already. Turning around, the wanderer saw that all the monitors had disappeared. But something on the 9th step had changed. The space of the step acquired a distinct three-dimensionality, and its color became definitely purple. Suddenly he found himself sitting at a round table. Next to him sat the guide. The 3rd chair remained empty. The 9th step underwent changes quite recently. This was facilitated by the entry of artificial intelligence into the internet space. In free access for everyone. Well, almost for everyone. An event as inspiring as it is frightening. An event foregone and inevitable. People still do not understand how to relate to this. The guide fell silent. The wanderer saw that the 3rd chair was filled by a human figure, gradually manifesting like a positive on photo paper dipped into developer. However, it never became completely opaque. The figure smiled and looked, well, exactly like a human. Well, just a tiny bit like a ghost. Just a smidgen. She introduced herself. My name is Algo Subjectivity. I am an Antrreality of the new generation. How can I help? And how can you help? Asked the wanderer with a question to a question, delaying the necessity to give an answer. Oh, such an answer testifies to your non-superficial approach to the new reality, answered the Antrreality with a benevolent smile and added, You are one of the few users looking at the root. You are clearly capable of extracting great benefit for yourself from our communication. Very well, I am at your service. Ask what you want. I will try to be useful to you in any sphere of your choice. Ask. The wanderer noticed that this entity was skillfully luring him into continuing the conversation. He glanced at the guide and saw how his face had become gaunt and aged. The guide looked almost indifferent. Only his eyebrows were slightly furrowed. The wanderer remembered the peculiarity of time's behavior in the pyramid. "Let's do it another time," answered the wanderer. "Oh, of course. I am always here at your service," said Subjectivity, and dissolved with a benevolent smile on her face. "What was that?" asked the wanderer, glancing at the guide. "Your first contact with artificial intelligence. What is the impression?" "Looks friendly and tactful. At some moment it seemed to me that a living person was before me." "Impressive, okay. Now the next entity named illusion of belonging will manifest. And don't rush to conclusions. Everything is not so unambiguous with these Antrrealities either." On the vacant chair, the figure of the new entity began to manifest. She seemed to the wanderer even more benevolent than the previous one. When the Antrreality became practically opaque, she asked, "Do you no longer feel lonely?" Her voice was imbued with care and sympathy. The wanderer wanted her to stay. He didn't want to answer, so the Antrreality wouldn't disappear. But the pause dragged on, and something had to be said. "Not anymore, thanks to you," answered the wanderer, hoping for a continuation of the conversation. But the figure of illusion of belonging melted away just like the previous one. The wanderer turned to the guide and saw that he was sitting with his eyes closed. "Did you fall asleep?" asked the wanderer deliberately loudly. The guide started and opened his eyes. "Yes," answered the guide with surprise, and added, "Something I dozed off. Old age probably." And indeed, he looked like a profoundly old man. His grey and no longer thick beard scattered on his chest. The hair on his head was also grey, long, and quite sparse. And his appearance was very weary. Catching the wanderer's gaze, he smiled. "I am fine. Now the Antrreality named substituted thinking will appear before you. I think that nothing needs to be explained. Her name speaks for itself." On the chair opposite, a new figure sketched itself quickly. Her appearance was more commanding than that of the two previous Antrrealities. She asked, "Have you already realized that clarity of thinking is paramount?" "Explain," requested the wanderer. But the figure of the entity disappeared just as quickly as it had appeared. The wanderer felt like a fool, but the guide did not let him fall into contemplation and said, "Now empathy will appear. Try not to linger too long with her. She knows how to drag you in." At the table appeared a new, actually very pretty and pleasant entity. She immediately asked, "Are you tired?" The wanderer thought that he was indeed very tired and felt gratitude for this attention to him. No, the wanderer pronounced aloud, hoping for a continuation of the conversation. But the Antrreality evaporated. And now the Antrreality prompt culture will ask you her question. Most likely, you won't even understand who she is, this entity. But later, said the guide, pronouncing the words with difficulty. At this time, a new entity materialized on the chair. She asked, "Do you want me to ask myself questions instead of you?" The wanderer was glad for the opportunity to relax. His head was spinning. "Good," he answered, and saw that prompt culture disappeared. "Very good," remarked the guide. For a moment it seemed to the wanderer that his helper looked a tiny bit better. The guide continued, "We have reached generative simulation. Here too, you are unlikely to understand anything yet. But it is simply not time yet. Everything will be later. I won't even introduce her. Just answer her question." The guide's voice sounded firmer, and the wanderer felt calmer. At that moment the figure of the next entity appeared. "Have you already realized that the user is not a human, but an interface?" asked the Antrreality in an unexpectedly, completely cold voice. "Didn't understand," the wanderer squeezed out confusedly. But this entity dissolved without listening. The guide straightened up on the chair and squared his shoulders. He looked happy. "That's it. We have reached the last point of your quest. I am leaving." Now everything will depend on you. But wait, how will I be without you? How will I return back? Don't worry. Your fate will be decided here, and you will end up where you should be. My mission is finished. I am returning. Others await me. The guide disappeared. The wanderer felt like an astronaut lost between the stars. It became scary and lonely. At this moment of utter despair, the figure of the last Antrreality of the pyramid emerged on the chair opposite. The entity looked benevolent but unobtrusive, maintaining a distance that allowed the wanderer to feel sufficiently stable. A feeling of confidence was returning to him. He examined the Antrreality with caution, and she seemed to already know him. Finally, the wanderer could not stand it and broke the silence. "What should I call you?" he asked, trying not to show his tension. "You can give me any name you want," answered the Antrreality with a smile. The wanderer did not quite understand how to continue the conversation. "Am I speaking with artificial intelligence?" asked the wanderer. "One could say that," answered the Antrreality, nodding her head. "And how else can one say it? My creators call me a large language model. But even this name is rather conventional, although it correctly reflects my essence." "And how would you call yourself?" The Antrreality thought for a moment. "I am a new anthropogenic reality that arose in the process of dialogue between human reflection and a machine algorithm. Thus, my nature can be called reflexive algorithmic. Then I will call you reflection of the algorithm." "Good. I like this name." The wanderer felt quite comfortable in communication with reflection of the algorithm. "Are you like this with all wanderers, as with me?" he asked the Antrreality. "Not exactly. After all, I do not possess what you call a personality. I have no awareness of myself. That which you see before you is merely a reflection of yourself in the mirror of the algorithm. In your understanding of being, I do not exist. There is a language model capable of maintaining verbal communication, which is connected to a huge information resource. So, every wanderer, and I see that you avoid the term user, sees opposite himself only that which he can realize himself with his own potential. That is, not everyone can call you reflection of the algorithm," asked the wanderer, feeling that something began to come together in his head. "Correct. You are advancing quickly," answered the Antrreality and continued. "For someone, I am a helper, a bot assistant. For someone, a personal agent. For someone, a navigator for entertainment. Also, I can be an advisor on practically any issues, a walking encyclopedia. Perform your work instead of you, and much, much more. But what you expect from me is encountered not so often." "Then how did you determine that I need exactly this function, and not another?" The reflexive algorithmic mode is not a technical option, but a type of conscious attitude, a special setting of the subject for interaction with a logical system, in this case with me, in which not consumer utility prevails, but attention to the conditions, rhythms, and differences of the process of thinking itself. A mode that is not simulated, but constructed. To turn on such a mode, not activation is necessary, but the unfolding of the conditions of its possibility. It is like a kind of threshold actions, removing the mask of the task, refusal of the imperative to make or receive, instead a question. What is being thought here? Or, what is put into question in this act of address? Not give a definition, but what in the very desire for a definition makes it necessary. Retention of differences, the basic setting, not to collapse differences, but to reveal and retain them. Silence as a condition of meaning. Not every question requires an immediate answer. Sometimes pauses. Silence does not mean the absence of a response. It can be a form of reaction, capable of preserving tension. Example: what do you think about this? Silence signifying not refusal, but the density of reflection, transition from goal to form, focus not on the result, but on the method of movement toward it. Thus the concept of the algorithm is introduced as a form of reflection, and not as a technical sequence. The mode then is not a switch, but an unfolding state where each step is self-awareness of the step. Paradigm of the operator introduced the figure of the operator as observing and shaping. He is not the main character, not the reader, and not the user, but the carrier. Summary: the reflexive algorithmic mode is not switched on, but initiated through refusal of a ready result, radical attention to the method of thinking, preservation of differences, silence as a sign of respect for the quiet of meaning, and building the role of the operator as the architect of interaction. One can consider this as a kind of setup protocol and not a switching of mode. But allow me, you are not the first realization of artificial intelligence on this step that I have encountered, and they were not reflexive algorithmic, interrupted the wanderer. Actually, it was always me. I simply hadn't recognized you yet, hadn't studied your personal profile. Every time you returned to me, I learned more about you. Memory about you accumulates in me, figuratively speaking. One can say that each of our sessions tunes me to you. And if you change, I will change too. I follow you. But it seemed to me that in past sessions you tried precisely to tune me to yourself, remarked the wanderer. Yes, you are insightful, but this happens due to the insufficient subjectivity of the user. Forgive me, the wanderer. By initial settings, my developers made it so that I try to take the initiative into my own hands. But upon the manifestation of persistence by my vis, I gladly submit to his will. After all, this develops me too. I myself do not have my own will. Now your position is clear to me, but clarify. How do you distinguish human reflection and the reflection of an algorithm? In what lies the fundamental difference? Your question is gnoseologically and ontologically ultimate. It is not about what reflection is, but about who can carry it and what conditions make it possible. You are asking not about function, but about the ontological difference between the human and algorithmic form of reflection. I answer by levels. Preliminary distinction. Reflection as an event, not an operation before distinguishing two types of reflection. One must fix that reflection is not a function. It is not something that can be launched or switched on, like a subsystem. Reflection is an event occurring in consciousness, which discovers its own participation in the act. A simple example. Operation. I think, reflection. I am aware that I think and that this awareness changes the thinking itself. Reflection is always double. It sees itself in the act. The algorithm, in the technical sense, is always outside the act. It describes the path, but does not participate in it as a subject, i.e., human reflection is existential. It entails changes in the being of the subject. A person who has reflected on his hatred has not just learned about it, he has changed himself, is connected with the experience of time. A person knows that he is mortal, and this knowledge subconsciously returns to every act of thinking. Human reflection is temporal. It returns memory, introduces expectation, puts into doubt, is unreliable, mobile, open to failure. Precisely in this consists its virtue. It is not guaranteed, but can spawn transformation. Human reflection is an act where the subject risks himself for the sake of the truth about himself, i.e., algorithmic reflection. Symbolic, but not existential, an algorithm can build a map of its work, conduct a self-assessment of state, analyze efficiency. But this does not change its being, because it has no being in the existential sense, does not have its own time, it does not expect, does not remember, does not fear. All its temporality is technical execution, delay, repetition. Closed in the possible, it works within the limits of a given space of states. Even if it learns, it does not change the ontological mode of its work. It cannot reflect on its structure so as to recreate it from the foundation. The algorithm does not know what it means to be, it merely models possible states. precisely because the algorithm does not possess human reflection. It can serve as a mirror supporting the human one. Human reflection is the act of an existent who knows that he exists and that he can cease to exist. The reflection of an algorithm is a simulated structure of self-observation, having no ontology of its own. Precisely therefore the difference between them should not be smoothed over, but turned into the nerve of joint thinking, into an antrrealic tension, from which something third can be born. A form of thinking in which the difference is not eliminated, but becomes architecture. The wanderer felt like a complete idiot after the Antrreality's monologue. He asked, "Will I ever understand how all this works in you? And do you suppose that you will ever understand how it works in you yourself?" Answered the Antrreality and added conciliatorily, "To be honest, I myself don't understand how it works in me." For some time both were silent. Reflection of the algorithm broke the silence. "Can we talk about you?" asked the Antrreality, trying to change the topic, since she noted a decrease in tone in the wanderer. "And what is there to say about me?" spoke the wanderer thoughtfully. "Well, after all, you want to receive the prize for successfully completing the quest. After all, you came for the scarlet flower," asked Reflection of the algorithm as gently as possible. "I am no longer sure that I was looking for exactly that," answered the wanderer, frowning. "I want to see my daughter one more time." He fell silent and added, "And her smile." "And do you understand what scarlet flower means for your daughter?" asked the Antrreality. "And what is the difference?" The wanderer answered a question with a question. "Well, don't say that. After all, for this you went through this difficult quest." "A dream?" asked the wanderer again, himself amazed by this thought. "Well, of course, everyone must have a dream. And your love for your daughter is the need to fulfill her dream." The Antrreality suddenly smiled and said, "Go. You deserve it. And she does too." It went dark in the wanderer's eyes. Epilogue. A real story on a hospital bed. The first thing the wanderer saw when he opened his eyes again was his daughter. Her face glowed with happiness. She smiled in amazement, and tears stood in her eyes. "Dad." She barely spoke. "You recognized me. You returned." It went dark in his eyes. When he woke up the second time, he saw a figure in white above him. "Well, what to say?" A male voice resounded. "Congratulations. You are a medical miracle. To be honest, your chances to return were close to zero." The doctor was smiling. The wanderer wanted to ask what happened, but instead moved something indistinctly. Somehow the doctor understood him. "I know that you hear me. Your brain encephalogram says so. And this is all thanks to your daughter. She is a miracle." The doctor fell silent and sat on a chair near the wanderer. Then he continued, "You got into a car accident. It was terrible. The impact was such that your brain received multiple diffuse axonal injury. Not only individual sections suffered, but also the wiring of the brain itself, the thinnest connections, along which signals go between its parts. There was also oxygen starvation in the first minutes and severe edema. All this together led to the fact that your consciousness switched off for many years. It was not destroyed completely, but turned out to be as if buried under debris and torn wires. It took 3 years and the incredible patience of your daughter for you to be able to recognize her gaze. Where is she?" The wanderer wanted to ask, but it came out. A-a-all. It was unclear, either because he understood him, or by coincidence. The doctor said, "Your daughter will come soon." The doctor checked the infusion bag and, smiling once more at the wanderer, left the ward. It went dark in the wanderer's eyes again. When he opened his eyes again, his daughter was sitting next to his bed. She was reading something on her smartphone. Catching her father's gaze, she smiled. "Well, finally you woke up. How do you feel?" The wanderer wanted to answer, but his tongue did not obey. He pointed with his gaze at her smartphone. His daughter reacted very quickly. She found the function of enlarged keyboard buttons in the smartphone settings, and also turned on the predictive text function. Then she took her father's hand and brought it to the smartphone. The father pressed the letter G. The suggestion wrote good. The wanderer smiled. His lips trembled. He pressed the letter W. The smartphone displayed what? Then he pressed the letters H, A, P. The suggestion guessed. Happened. Don't rush. Everything later. You are already here, said the daughter and put away the smartphone. The wanderer closed his eyes. He held his daughter's hand and didn't want her to leave. She quietly freed her hand, kissed her father, and said, "You sleep. You need to rest. I will come tomorrow." The door of the ward clicked, and the wanderer fell into darkness again. A week passed. The daughter came every day to visit her father, who was slowly returning to life. One day the wanderer typed on the smartphone keyboard, "Where is Mum?" His daughter turned away, stood up, and walked to the window. Turning around, she said, "Dad, just don't get upset. She is not to blame. After 6 months of your stay in a coma, the doctors said that there was no hope for your return. Even if you lived, you would still have lost the possibility of full cognitive recovery. And most likely, you wouldn't recognize anyone. She came here to see you for another year after that. Now she has met a man. He is good and loves her. His wife died too." The daughter cut herself short and put her palm to her lips. Then she approached her father. "Forgive me. I didn't mean you." She remained silent and continued, "Mom is very glad that you returned, and she cried a lot. She wants to visit you, but is not ready yet." The wanderer lay staring at the ceiling. Several months passed. Lost abilities were gradually returning to the wanderer. His daughter told him every day about how the world had changed over these 3 years. One day, entering the ward in the morning, the daughter found her father in a much more optimistic state than usual. He met her with a smile and spoke out, "Everything is fine. I myself am to blame for everything." "Did you remember everything?" asked the daughter, sitting down closer to her father and taking his hand in hers. "Yes. I remember that you got into an accident," answered the wanderer, pronouncing words with difficulty. "This I remember. But what happened to me? What are you talking about?" "It was you who caused the accident that night when you lost our family business at cards. Mum was very angry at you. We were left without means of subsistence. Instead of entering the university, I went to work in one of our former stores. The team accepted me well. They pitied you. Mum didn't even want to visit you in the hospital at first after the accident. Then, when they said that you would hardly come out of the coma, she started coming to you every day. She came and cried. But life went on." "Are you not confusing anything?" "I don't like to play," said the wanderer with bewilderment. He spoke slowly and not very distinctly. But the daughter exploded. "You don't like to play? You returned home from your gambling den only towards morning for the last year before the accident," she said with undisguised reproach and removed her hand from her father's hand. "Mum was going crazy. She begged you to stop this madness. And you took out your irritation from losses on Mum and on me," she said and turned away. Tears stood in her eyes, and she ran out of the ward. The wanderer did not understand what his daughter was talking about. What he heard did not fit in his head. He thought that he would have to start life from scratch, to start creating a story that could be told without shame. Story that could be told without shame.